Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where today the focus of attention is on this machine, as up to recently, it's not really been used to its full potential. So let's see how that's changed as we look at my Amiga A4000. This is a very typical looking A4000 desktop. The case is yellowing quite badly, even if the camera is doing its absolute best to change the white balance to make it look a lot better than it actually is. But as I'm not really that big on retro brighting, it will stay like this or get even more yellow possibly, as I don't mind machines showing their age, as long as they're clean obviously. And this one has had a hard working life, and it feels a shame to lose some of that. Now connected to it is a also very yellowed keyboard that I've cleaned, and I've got connected to it my trusty laser upgraded tank mouse. Now it did come with an optical mouse, but it's one that would only work with a very special mouse mat. But I prefer my tank mouse as I can use this very classy mouse mat, and we cannot forget the 1084 monitor that I actually got with this machine when I bought it, and it has also been recently fixed up, so it's working absolutely great. But really the magic of this machine is inside, so let's take a look at its innards. You can think of the A4000 as the big box version of the A1200, as they both share the same basic graphics and sound abilities of the AGA chipset. But this also has Zorro slots, so it can be upgraded, which for the most part I've not done. But what I have done is some fixing up, as the Vata, Destroyer of Worlds, has visited this machine, and I've got some pictures of what it was like before it was worked on. And as you can clearly see, this was done by a professional, not by me. As they cleaned up the area around the battery, they replaced the SIM slots, they recapped the whole board, and yes, the clock will never work again, and I think there still might be a few niggling issues, but for the most part, it's all working great. Now if we go to the other side of the bridge board, we will find the CPU accelerator, which is the Macro System's Warp Engine. This has been paired with a 68040 CPU running at 40 MHz, and has 64 MB of RAM on the board, as it's much faster to have the RAM on here than on the main motherboard itself. There's also a SCSI 2 port, which I will be using. The system is running Kickstart 3.2, which I was meant to get when I bought OS 3.2, but I forgot to add the ROMs to the order, didn't I? So a big thanks to Pillock who burnt a set for me, and I am fully licensed up Hyperion, there's no need to track either of us down. This came with a few upgrades, that included these two video processing cards for doing video editing work. These, from what I've been able to work out, are the Digital Processing Systems Personal Animated Recorder and Personal TBC4, that when connected could edit video and then apply various effects and animations, which is all quite cool as it was used for video production back in its original life. And as I've got absolutely no idea on how to use any of this stuff, I've kept them safely stored, along with the very chunky dedicated hard drive that we used to connect up to one of the cards. But one of the upgrades that it came with that I do use is the Hydra AmigaNet network card. Now this is easily the largest network card I have ever used, and due to the dual BNC connectors, it makes it a bit of a pain to insert into the machine. And to get it onto the network, it's hooked up via these regular CheaperNet cables, to a switch that supports both it and Ethernet. And it's not the fastest thing, as we'll see later. But before we start it up, we're going to need a hard drive, and for that we're bypassing the IDE port, which has a terminator connected so it doesn't slow down the boot anymore, and instead we're going to be using that SCSI 2 port we found on the accelerator, and with that I'm going to be connecting it to a Blue SCSI V2, which I've built this very rickety bracket so it will stick out the back. Now other emulators like the SD to SCSI or the Zulu SCSI would also work very well here. I just picked up one of these because it was cheap and I know how well it works, from my own personal experience. But what I found didn't work, that I thought might do, is the SD extension cable, as it seems the transfer speeds were way too high for the cheapness of the cables and it meant errors kept coming up. So in the end we have this very colourful SCSI cable sneaking over the bridge board so it'll stick out the back. Although now I've got the network working, there's much less of a need to take that card out anymore, apart from a few instances that we'll talk about later. And with it all set up, it's time to boot. And wow, with that IDE terminator in place and the warp engine and the Blue SCSI, this thing boots fast. And what we end up with is a very basic looking workbench. As people that know me know that I prefer a very simple stock looking OS, so there's no magic workbench here. What I have done is added the tools menu, so I have quick access to all my popular tools. This includes Roadie, which starts up the paid Roadshow networking stack, and with it and SMBFS I can now mount a drive from my NAS, and I can use that to get software and games on and off the machine. But it's not the fastest. In fact, my speed tests that were similar to what I've done previously put it around 150 to 200 kilobytes a second. So we're not going to be breaking any speed records here, but it is fast enough to move the odd game and program around. Or at least I can start the transfer and just leave it going. This includes sending over ADF files that I've generated using a drawbridge, as 3.2 supports mounting them directly. And when I'm done with it, I can then use DA control to unmount them afterwards. The updated icon info panel also makes it much easier to add icons and comments than ever before, so I have to say I am enjoying the improvements that they have included in 3.2. I have all the other typical software here as well, including Directory Opus and Deluxe Paint 3. And I would have added something like Jano, but the built-in text editor is actually good enough for editing configs or scripts that I didn't bother in the end. But if there is anything that you think I'm missing, then you can let me know down in the comments. Or even find the Discord. We have an Amiga channel that's just waiting for software suggestions. But I know you're all getting that itch, as it's been a good few minutes into an Amiga hardware video and we've not seen sysinfo. So relax, it's coming up now. And the speed test gives us a really good showing. That 40 MHz 040 CPU really does fly in that warp engine card. And the drive speed tests also put out a very respectable score. So it makes for a nice machine to push those more resource intensive games. Like, obviously, Frontier Elite 2. You cannot talk about a faster Amiga and not show this game off. And this runs buttery smooth. I remember playing this on my 500 Plus and I could only dream of an Amiga that would run it this well. And while we bask in the glory of the intro, I want to talk about why this machine didn't get used all that often. And it was mostly down to two issues. The first, the mouse would either move vertically or horizontally. It could not do both at the same time. Which, as you can imagine, a little bit of a problem while trying to play games or even use the OS. It also wouldn't power the laser mouse. Now, of all the changes that I made to try and fix this, it was the one that I least expected that actually seemed to do the trick. And that was to reset most of the jumpers on the warp engine card. I'm not 100% sure why this worked, but it was one of the recommendations and it seems they were right. The other problem I had was I got lots of graphical corruptions in games. This turned out to be the motherboard RAM that I had connected at the time, I think there might still be some damage under one of those traces from the Vata. As soon as I removed it, and just relied on the accelerator RAM, everything became far more stable. The games ran great, there was no issues after that. Well, unless you try to run a memory check, that will crash it. So it's not 100% healthy, but it's now in a state that I'm really quite happy with it, so I hope to use it far more often, even if it is a little bit loud when I try to film it. I have replaced the PSU fan with an Noctura fan, and that helped a lot, but I think it's the fan that's on the CPU that's making most of the noise. And it seems to be glued on as well, so I might have to look into a replacement for that at some point. And it's obviously getting all these things sorted that's inspired me to use this machine far more often. As before, it was a real challenge. And with some of the upgrades like that SCSI emulator, it's so much better than it was before. As well, I can now just drop drive images onto the SD card, so it's much easier to get new drives onto the system. So I have the OS, games and WHD load and all the others as their own individual images on the card, so I can now back those up or update them as needed. All while being so much faster than an IDE drive. Well, it was a compact flash drive, but it's all the same really. I did consider adding a CD-ROM drive to the machine, as their IDE port is now obviously free. And 3.2 makes working with CDs so much easier. But with the other options that I now have for getting software on the machine, it didn't seem all that useful, as I can just throw an ISO file onto the SD card and have that mount. I can transfer files over the network. So it's really just games that are already on CD that I don't want to make my own rips of that I have problems with. And as this machine is still using the original AGA sound and graphics, it really is just acting like a very, very fast A1200, which is great for those games that make use of that extra speed. But it might be nice to check out an RTG card, or even one of those fancy sound cards. But those will definitely have to be future upgrades, as well. Have you ever tried to find one of those at a decent price? They can be quite pricey. And there is only a few games that would support it anyway. But what upgrades or changes would you like to see done to this machine? Are you a die-hard fan of Magic Workbench? Or do you like having all those fancy glow icons? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that is my Amiga 4000, and no, I will not sell it to you. And this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching, and hearing me talk about this very special Amiga. I've covered the platform quite a lot, and will continue to do so in the future, so there will be videos that you can check out on the screen right now. Or if you really enjoyed what you just viewed, then you can use the buttons that are just down there, as that will let YouTube know what you thought of it.